How do we build a system where education works hand in hand with the industry and not individually?
Again, we thought about this problem. We got Mr. Narayanamurthy to do a study on academia-industry interface. And I have to tell you, he wrote a very good report that sadly, soon after we lost and left, has been more or less shelved by the government. And I think it's a mistake. They should have, not everything the UPA government did needs to have been disavowed by the NDA. And one day when we take over from the NDA, we will not disavow any of the good things they may have done, though I don't see too many examples of it during an election season in particular. But I will say that Mr. Narayanamurthy made some very valid points. One of the things that struck me, having spent a large number of years in the US, was how common it was in the US that a company, when it came up with an idea, would go to a nearby campus and say, guys, have you got any graduate students or doctoral students who can research this for us? If they can make this idea viable and figure out a way of how it could be manufactured, we will first of all give you all the money for their research, and we pay their stipends and so on. And then if a product is makeable and we make it, we'll share the royalties with you. And so it's a win-win for the university, for the students, and for the company. They don't have to hire people on spec, as it were. The students get a practical work opportunity, which may or may not work out for them, but if it works out, fantastic. If it works out, there's benefits on both sides. And there's a direct connection between a real functioning industry and an academic establishment. Now, this is very common. This is how Silicon Valley was built. This is how the Raleigh-Durham Triangle in North Carolina came into being. In India, it's practically unknown. And I made speeches in those days as minister encouraging more of this to happen in our country. And I think the government's job is to create an enabling environment. We should create a framework. I say we are not yet in government, though we hope to be at the end of this election. But the government of India should create an enabling framework that facilitates, makes it possible, maybe even gives incentives for this kind of thing to happen. It's startling, for example, that in most of the advanced countries, the bulk of investment in research comes from the private sector. In India, the bulk of investment in research, and it's not enough, is coming from the government sector. That shouldn't be happening. Why should the taxpayer be bearing the burden when, in fact, in every other country, the private sector is carrying the burden? In OECD countries, something like 75% of all research expenditure comes from the private sector. In India, it's about 80-90% from the government. Let's reverse that. Let's get more private sector money into research. Now, my figures may be slightly out of date because my in-depth data goes back to when I was in government, and that's now 10 years ago. But I will say that it couldn't have improved that much from what I've seen. And it needs to improve a heck of a lot more. But the government, in turn, should make it attractive for businesses to spend that money on research and development by giving them tax breaks and other incentives.
Something like CSR, but for research, like research-linked incentive program.
Yeah.
Right? So you also
and
spoke
in turn,
about
university should get extra credit for enabling this kind of thing so that they benefit and the students benefit. I'm also a big believer in university autonomy. Maybe a university located right next to an industry will have the freedom to do things that other universities don't. A university somewhere else might have another kind of freedom. Give them the autonomy, and eventually students will vote with their feet as well. If the university is hopeless or is not doing anything relevant, students will go elsewhere where they've already heard that you go to that place and they're doing cutting edge work in this field or that field, or they've got to tie up with this company and that industry. People will go, and as a result, you'll see which educational system grows better.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching the Indian Business Podcast. If you find value in our work, please hit that subscribe button, because for you it might be a zero effort task, but for us, that subscriber count is an important instrument to get great guests to our podcast and to make this podcast better for you. So if you find value, please subscribe.